Howdy, everybody. Welcome. How we all doing? Testing. Testing. Thanks for tuning in. Here we are, March 30th. It's been a while. Appreciate everybody's patience. It's kind of an out of nowhere video here. Subscribers have been messaging me back and forth over the years about this subject. I mentioned it in a video when I did Anomalous America California episode talking about, I mentioned Queen Califia in that video and said that I'd like to dive into the material, and randomly came across some old posts of mine. And yeah, here we are. So I just thought I'd try to squeeze something in before the end of the month. Just got back from spring break and family time and all that stuff, and took a little hiatus from making videos as I had a little injury in my back, and sitting in a computer chair was pretty shitty. And yeah, so here we are. I hate making promises, which I have a bad habit of doing, and then I never follow through with them. So I'm trying to reduce that quite a lot. But yeah, so here we are. Thanks for joining me. People are kind of trickling in, so we'll start a little bit just with some background. I'm sure this is a subject that maybe some of you are slightly familiar with, but have never touched on, or have no idea what this is. If you haven't gone back already and seen Anomalous America California, I strongly recommend it. This will probably be like a 2 or 3 part episode series, nothing crazy. But yeah, I just thought it'd be fun. Anomalous America, Nebraska, it's pretty much done. I haven't posted anything as I haven't really been at the computer for like 3 weeks. So playing a little catch up here. But yeah. So let's share screen and get right into it. Let me know if I'm too loud, or every time I log into StreamYard, it looks completely different. It's changing it constantly. I'm always behind the ball on that, aren't I? But yeah, we're just going to go into some, wiki. We're going to read some wiki, which we don't do very often, just to kind of give everybody a little background. And if you're already familiar with the story, then, that's fantastic. Then we'll get into one of the oldest articles that I've ever come across. I mentioned this one and read a little excerpt from it in my Anomalous America California episode. It's from like the 1830s, 1860s. I can't remember which. 1864. And then we'll read a little bit longer one from 1913. Kind of explore the myths or surrounding this idea of California not only being an island, which again, is still considered a myth, although there's quite a lot of proof of this. But also, what America was, the lore of America, 14th century, 15th century, and how Queen Califia fits into all of that, maybe tie her into the Queen of Sheba, Solomon myth. But yeah, so here we go. I'm going to share some screenage here. Appreciate you guys joining me. Like I said, we're going to do a little Wikipedia dive here, and then we'll go into some articles. I'll probably wrap up episode 2 going into some older books and explore California as an island. And that'll kind of be it. But yeah, Califia or Califia is a fictional queen on the island of California. First introduced by 16th century poet Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo in his epic of chivalry Las Sargas de Espalandia, The Adventures of Espalandia. Written around 1510, she is the namesake of the California region encompassing the U.S. state of California and the Mexican states of Baja California and Baja California Sur. In the novel, Califia is a pagan warrior queen who ruled over a kingdom of black women living on the island of California. We'll also kind of use this as a jump off point to talk about the Amazons, or the Amazon warriors, which I've mentioned in a few other videos, shown some pretty interesting articles. Califia is convinced to raise an army of women warriors and sail away from California with a large flock of trained griffins so that she can join a Muslim battle against Christians who are defending Constantinople. We're going to kind of jump around again. Just going to go to the bottom here. Again, you can read the whole wiki for yourself if you're interested in a little bit more detail. Etymology. The first voyage of Christopher Columbus in the late 15th century sparked a new interest in the search for the terrestrial paradise. Now, this is important and relative because of the connections I've made with all the other videos talking about, America is Eden and America is the terrestrial paradise. And probably a dozen videos or more mentioning this exact same thing with 20 or 30 authors and historians and people coming to this similar conclusion. A legendary land of ease and riches with beautiful women wearing gold and pearls. Spanish author drew upon reports from the New World to add interest to his fantasy world of chivalry and battle, of riches, victory, and loss, of an upside-down depiction of a traditional sex roles around the year 1500 in his novel, The Adventures of Espalandia. Know ye that at the right hand of the Indies, there is an island called California. Now, we've gone over a few maps over the history of the channel and some of the oldest ones showing that America was labeled India Superior. Very close to that part of the terrestrial paradise, which was inhabited by black women without a single man among them, and they lived in the manner of the Amazons. They were robust of body, with strong, passionate hearts and great virtue. The island itself is one of the wildest in the world on account of the bold and craggy rocks. Here's an image. There are dozens and dozens that show a similar layout of California as an island. Again, we'll skip forward here a little bit more for the sake of time. Legends of an island of women warriors. Rodriguez de Montalvo's description of Califia, her people, her country, was based upon many centuries of stories of Amazons, groups of women warriors who fought like men. As well, the story of the island paradise filled with gold and pearls was a recurring theme that Rodriguez was familiar with. In seeking new lands, Spanish explorers were often led onward after hearing about a land of gold or a land ruled by women. Probably in the next episode, we'll dive into historical references that go much further back than the Spanish explanations. We'll talk a little bit about Columbus's exact verbiage for the people. Remember when he said he was sailing to Cathay, right? Even though he said that he was in search of America, he was also in search of the fabled lands of Prester John. We'll make some correlations between the myths of Prester John and a little bit of Greek mythology. Who were the Amazons in Greek mythology? I've made enough correlations between the Indians east of the Mississippi River, how the Creeks and the Greeks and much of their language had much of the same symbology that a lot of these native culture myths had identical overlays with Greek mythology, and talk about some of these underground Amazons that were described not only from California to the Appalachian Mountains all the way into South America. In Greek mythology, Amazons are described as a nation of female warriors who live in kingdoms outside of recognized civilization. Women who fight with Greek warriors. They appear in many Greek tales, including those by Homer, and they are usually killed or otherwise subdued by male warriors. Male hostility to the women warriors is expressed by Dictys of Crete, who wrote that an Amazon queen transgressed the boundaries of nature and of her sex. Tacitus, a medieval Greek historian, wrote about women warriors who fought alongside men in the Second Crusade, riding horses unashamedly at astride, dressed as men and maintaining a very warlike appearance. Jacques de Vertry, a bishop of Acre and a historian of the Crusades, wrote about Amazons who fought, who were stronger than men because their vitality was not consumed in frequent copulation. In some stories, women warriors fought alongside Muslim men, and in others, they allied themselves to Christian armies. Some of the tales of Amazons describe them as having dark skin. In Africa, King Musa I of Mali was protected by black female royal guards on his famous and influential Hajj to Mecca in 1332. We'll cover a little bit more about that and supposedly of the idea of their background and historical placement as far as geographical placement. Johann Schlittberger wrote in 1440 about a group of Tatar Amazons, Mongol giantesses led by a vengeful princess. We'll get into that a little bit as well in episode 2. Again, the griffins, the symbology of the griffins, and the Mongol Tartar overlays. Again, tying this all kind of back to that same sweet spot of 13th, 14th century. Columbus returned to Spain with the story of an island in the Lesser Antilles called Montenino, perhaps modern Martinique, that was inhabited only by women, a tale told to him by many of the natives of the West Indies. Columbus did not call the Montenino women Amazons, but the comparison was drawn by his contemporaries. When encountering natives in the New World, Spanish explorers were occasionally told of a tribe composed entirely of women. One tale was related to Cortez about a group of Amazons supposedly living in a province called Quiguatan. Juan de Grijava was told of Amazons during his 1518 expedition through the Tabasco region of Mexico. Nuna de Guzman followed tales of a nation of women who lived in riches on or near the sea, women with whiter skin who were accounted goddesses by the natives. He described how they used bows and arrows and lived in many towns. Polk characterized Guzman as driven by lust for sex and riches. His greed and sadism were well known. We'll stop there and get into the articles for the sake of time. 65 of you, thanks for joining me, everybody. Kind of jumped into articles, is a little faster than usual. Didn't really get a time to greet anybody. Brett, good to see you. Mr. Biggs, thanks for joining me. Dustin, good to see you. Sovereign, invisible, untraceable, welcome. Mr. C, thanks for being here. Mulligan, welcome. Cody, have the decency to make her melanated. Yeah, I mean, obviously, 99% of all information or accounts of her as dark-skinned, obviously melanated. Lame ass racist. I'm not really sure what this guy's on about. Yeah, so like I said, we're going to kind of focus on just these two articles here, and episode 2 will be more of a mishmash of several different references, and we'll bring in the correlations, because obviously we talk a lot about timelines and how timelines have been used to separate characters, and they've been given many names across many cultures and separated into different people, and kind of like the um, flamenco chronology idea that we can shrink these timelines into, just a few hundred years, 11th century and on. But yeah, here we go. So this is the first one. It's called The Queen of California. It's one of the oldest articles. And again, I read an excerpt from this in Anomalous America, California, which I think if this is something you're interested in a deeper level, I would definitely recommend that episode. Every episode, really. Again, I've kind of established the base that we're dealing with the cultures on cultures on cultures idea. But yeah, so 1864, the Queen of California. The Queen of California, whom we write, is no modern queen. She reigned some 550 years ago. Her precise contemporaries were Amadis of Gaul and Emperor Esplandia and the Sultan Radiaro, and she flourished, as the books say, at the time when the Sultan made his unsuccessful attack on the city of Constantinople. Another thing I want to touch on is, as I've said, of course, Constantinople of today in Turkey, this idea that cities had different names, or at least their contemporaries, and that there were cities of the same name or duplicate cities all around the world, Jerusalem, so on and so forth. Something we'll come back to, so just keep that in mind. All of which she saw, part of which she was. She was not petite, nor blonde, nor golden-haired. She was large and black as the ace of clubs. So this article, again, is interesting. It bounces around, kind of throwing this idea of myth and, legend. But 90% of all old newspaper articles about her can always start by reinforcing the idea that we're completely talking about a myth. And this is just a made-up story, a romance, a novel, right? Fiction. But the wording here in this one is quite different. And again, as I've said so many times before, the farther back you go into the 1800s, they seem to have this same trait. Like I said, she was large and black as the ace of clubs, but the prejudice of color did not then exist, even among the most brazen-faced or the most copper-headed. For as you shall learn, she was reputed the most beautiful of women, and it was she, O Californians, who wedded the gallant prince Talanki. So that name is really important. Talanki, the prince here that she supposedly marries. A name very similar is found in the Nebraska, Dakota area. And he was a king that the Spaniards ended up running into when they were led falsely by some guides to what they believed to be El Dorado, and that he was called the last Tartar king of the Americas. And I want to say Nebraska, but I can't remember if it was Nebraska or South Dakota. They still celebrated this man. So these myths carried some weight even up until the 1800s, which is surprising, right? 400 or 500 years for something that they went to quite extensive lengths to sell us on being a complete myth. Yet many cross-culture examples survived for hundreds of years. And right, again, the Spaniards were willing to risk crossing the Atlantic Ocean and taking a several month trip into middle America to try to explore this concept of El Dorado, right? I mean, they believed it was real. Hundreds of people lost their lives to try to get to this area. Hopefully, in the Nebraska episode, I can dive a little deeper into that. The supporter of the arms of the beautiful shield of the state of California should be on the right a knight armed captipi, and on the left an Amazon sable clothed in skins, as you shall now see. E.F. Hale of Boston sent to the Antiquarian Society last year a paper which shows that the name of California was known to literature before it was given to our peninsula by Cortez. Cortez discovered the peninsula in 1535 and seems to have called it California then. But Hale shows that 25 years before that time, in a romance called The Deeds of Esplandia, the names of California was given to an island on the right hand of the Indies. This romance was a sequel or fifth book to the celebrated romance of Amadis of Gaul. Such books made the principal reading of the young blades of that day who could read it all. Let me know in the comments if you want me to, at the end of this episode, perhaps at the end of this episode or episode 2, if you want me to go a little further. We can get into Esplandia and Amadis of Gaul, and you'll see some more correlations, but it's not a small read, but perhaps I'm willing to summarize if there's interest there. Such books made the principal reading of the young blades of that day who could read it all. It seems clear enough that Cortez and his friends, coming to the point furthest to the west then known, which all of them from Columbus down supposed to be in the East Indies, gave their discovery the name. Now, we talked again about how there was no confusion about what America was. Columbus, again, was led by people that had been to this continent. Trade was going back and forth. There was no mystery. Again, of correlations with the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors and what that actually symbolized and what America already was in those time frames. So when we talk about Columbus saying he's going to the Indies, it's not an accident or he had poor maps or anything like that. In fact, he was going to what he called Katai. Well known. So again, this concepts of mislabeling of maps and how much of this has been completely altered, probably 15th century onward. Where was I? My apologies. Supposed to be in the East Indies, gave to their discovery the name familiar to romantic adventurers of California to indicate their belief that this was on the right hand of the Indies. Just so Columbus called his discoveries the Indies, just so was the name El Dorado given to the region which was hoped would prove to be golden. Now, in the Anomalous America California episode, I talk about California being the Ophir of Solomon. And I go quite into depth about the discoveries made in California in the 1800s. And, it was probably the most geologically rich region of the Americas. Diamonds, gold, radium, mercury. I mean, I've talked a little bit about this in the past, but the idea that Silicon Valley is where it is because of the red mercury mines, the richest of all in the world in that time frame, are where they are in that region. And again, diamonds and gold and silicon, right? And how important all of those things are. And the rebranding, right? That's gone on here. California was an ancient kingdom of immense grandeur, and just the digging out of the region in the 1800s shows that quite clearly. The romance had said that in the whole of the Romance Island of California, there was no metal but gold. Cortez did not find a pennyweight of dust in the real California, still had no objection to giving so golden a name to his discovery. Again, why it's important to go back to the Anomalous America. If you've seen the California episode, you understand the amount of ancient mining they found there is insanely extensive, and giants. Hale, with that brevity, which becomes an antiquarian's, does not go into any of the details of life and adventures of the Queen of California as the romance describes them. We propose in this paper to supply from it this retency of his essay. Hopefully you can see this. I don't want to zoom in too far, as the quality on this paper, unfortunately, is not the best. I'm right here. If you want to read along, the reader must understand then that in this romance, printed in 1510, 60 years or less after Constantinople really fell into the bands of the Turks, the author describes a pretended assault made upon it by the infidel powers, and the rallying for its rescue of Amadis and Perion and Lisuarte and all the princes of chivalry with whom the novel of Amadis of Gaul has dealt. They succeed in driving away the pagans, as you shall hear, in the midst of this great crusade, every word of which, of course, is the most fictitious of fiction, appear the episodes which describe California as queen. First, of California itself, her is the description. Now you are to hear the most extraordinary thing that ever was heard in any chronicles or in the memory of man, by which the city would have been lost on the next day, but that where the danger came, there the safety came also. Know then that on the right hand of the Indies there is an island called California, very close to the island of the terrestrial paradise. And it was peopled by black women without any man among them, for they lived in the fashion of Amazons. They were of strong and hardy bodies, of ardent courage and great force. Their island was the strongest in all the world, with its steep cliffs and rocky shores. Their arms were all of gold, and so was the harness of the wild beasts which they tamed and rode. For in the whole island there was no metal but gold. They lived in caves wrought out of the rock with much labor. They had many ships, with which they sailed out to other countries to obtain booty. In this island called California, there were many griffins, on account of the ruggedness of the country and its infinite hosts of wild beasts, such as never were seen in any other part of the world. Now, again, this is kind of important because it ties in with what I had just mentioned about Columbus and how he was coming to the land of Prester John, the land of Katai. Again, correlating this too kind of with the idea of Tolkien's mythos, right? This land of beasts. And when you dive into Prester John and Katai, you see a lot of these descriptions of griffins and all kinds of crazy half breeds and animals. And yeah, this is again why I was correlating this stuff with the Tartary and the flag of Tartary and the griffin. And when these griffins were yet small, the women went out with traps to take them. They covered themselves over with thick hides, and when they had caught the little griffins, they took them to their caves and brought them up there. And being themselves quite a match for the griffins, they fed them with the men who they took prisoners, and with the boys to whom they gave birth, and brought them up with such arts that they got much good from them and no harm. Every man who landed on the island was immediately devoured by these griffins, and although they had enough, nonetheless would they seize them and carry them high up in the air in their flight, and when they were tired of carrying them, would let them fall anywhere as soon as they died. These griffins are the monitors of the story, or if the reader pleases, the Miramax. After this description, the author goes on to introduce us to our queen. Observe, O reader, that although very black and very large, she is very beautiful. Why did not Powers carve his statue of California out of the blackest of Egyptian marbles? Try once more, Powers. We have found her now. Now, at the time when those great men of the pagans sailed with their great fleets, as the history has told you, there reigned in the island of California a queen, a very large in person, the most beautiful of all of them, of blooming years, and in her thoughts desirous of achieving great things, strong of limb and of great courage, more than any of those who had filled her throne before her. She heard tell that all the greater part of the world was moving in this onslaught against the Christians. Now, this is really important to think about too, because when we kind of get a little bit further into the correlations with the Tartars and the idea of how this correlates, you'll see the kind of Christian war be brought back up and why it's important. We'll talk a little bit about the flamenco chronology problems and how those are important. She did not know what Christians were, for she had no knowledge of any parts of the world excepting those which were close to her. But she desired to see the world and its various people, and thinking that with the great strength of herself and of her women, she should have the greater part of their plunder, either from her rank or from her prowess. She began to talk with all of those who were the most skilled in war, and told them that it would be well if, sailing in their great fleets, they also entered on this expedition in which all these great princes and lords were embarking. If anybody's seen the modern rendition of Wonder Woman, I believe it is, the overlays with this story are really remarkable. She animated and excited them, showing them the great profits and honors which they would gain in this enterprise. Above all, the great fame which would be theirs in all the world. While if they stayed in their island doing nothing but what their grandmothers did, they were really buried alive. They were dead while they lived, passing their days without fame and without glory, as did the very brutes. Now, the people of California were as willing then to embark in distant expeditions of honor as they are now. And the first battalion that ever sailed from the ports of that country was thus provided. So much did this mighty Queen Califia, I'll use this to go back and look at some comments real quick. Griffin's, damn the getting the booty. Only Jesus, the living water, can satisfy the thirsty soul. Prester John Apple Polo. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Marco Polo. Where's the Griffin now? We need them. Theoretically, if the myth were true, the men likely lived separately. California condor is huge and pretty wild looking, currently an endangered species. They do not need men to procreate. Captured men impregnation or protogenius. Is that what it's called? 80 of you. Welcome again. Those who missed the intro, I'm going through some Queen Califia material. Going to translate or transition some of this into talking a little bit about Roman myths with the Amazons, and go through some other newspaper articles about other tribes finding women living underground, and make this correlation, show some interesting articles about California as an island. Yeah, so just kind of a fun little separate grouping of stuff that I never got the chance, as the density of the material, to go over in my California episode, and a conversation I had with a subscriber led me to just decide to take a little time out of the other material and go through this. So that's what we're doing. To say to her people that she not only moved them to consent to this enterprise, but they were so eager to extend their fame through other lands that they begged her to hasten to sea so that they might earn all these honors. An alliance with such great men. The queen, seeing the readiness of her subjects without any delay, gave orders that the Lear great fleet should be provided with food and with arms of gold, more of everything than was needed. Then she commanded that her largest vessel should be prepared with gratings of the stoutest timber, and she bade place in it as many as 500 of these griffins, of which I tell you that from the time when they were born, they were trained to feed on men. And she ordered that the beasts on which she and her people rode should be embarked. I mean, Imagine how large a vessel to fit 500 griffins, let alone all the people. That's 500 people on top of 500 griffins, right? And she ordered that the beasts on which, and all the beasts armed women and those most skilled in war whom she had in her island. And then, leaving such a force in the island that it should be secure, with the others she went to sea. And they made such haste that they arrived at the fleets of the pagans the night after the battle of which I have told you, so that they were received with great joy, and the fleet was visited at once by many great lords, and they were welcomed with great acceptance. She wished to know at once in what condition affairs were, asking many questions, which they answered fully. And then she said, "You have fought this city with your great forces, and you could not take it. Now, if you are willing, I wish to try what my forces are worth tomorrow, if you will give orders accordingly." All these great lords said they would give such commands as she should bid them. Then send word to all your other captains that they shall tomorrow, on no account, leave their camps, they nor their people, until I command them, and you shall see a combat more remarkable than you have ever seen or heard of. Word was sent at once to the great Sultan of Laquia, the Sultan of Jalapa, who had command of all the men who were there, and they gave these orders to their people, wondering much what was the thought of this queen. Up to this moment, it may be remarked, these monitors, as we have called the griffins, had never been fairly tried in any attack on fortified towns. The DuPont of the fleet, whatever her name may have been, may well have looked with some curiosity on the issue. The experiment was not wholly successful, as will be seen. When the night had passed and the morning came, the Queen Califia sailed on shore. She and her women, armed with that armor of gold, all adorned with the most precious stones, which are to be found in the island of California, like stones of the fields for their abundance. And they mounted on their fierce beasts, caparisoned? Not sure. As I have told you. And then she ordered that a door should be opened in the vessel where the griffins were. They, when they saw the field, rushed forward with great haste, showing great pleasure in flying through the air, and at once caught sight of the host of men who were close at hand. As they were famished and knew no fear, each griffin pounced upon his man, seized him in his claws, carried him high into the air, and began to devour him. They shot many arrows at them and gave them many great blows with lances and with swords. But their feathers were so tight joined and so stout that no one could strike through their flesh. For their own party, this was the most lovely chase and the most agreeable that they had ever seen till then. And the Turks saw them flying on high with their enemies. They gave such loud and clear shouts of joy as pierced the heavens. And it was the most sad and bitter thing for those in the city when the father saw the son lifted into the air, and the son his father, and the brother and his brother, so that they all wept and raved, and was sad induced to see. When the griffins had flown through the air for a while and had dropped their prizes, some on the earth and some on the sea, they turned as at first, and without any fear, seized upon as many more, at which their masters had so much the more joy, and the Christians so much more misery. What shall I tell you? The terror was so great among them all, that while some hid themselves away under the vaults of the towers for safety, all the others disappeared from the ramparts, so that there were none left for their defense. Queen Califia saw this, and with a loud voice, she bade the two sultans who command the troops send for ladders, for the city was taken. At once they all rushed forward, placed the ladders, and mounted upon the wall. But the griffins, who had already dropped those whom they had seized before, as soon as they saw the Turks, having no knowledge of them, seized upon them, just as they had seized upon the Christians, and flying through the air, carried them up also. When letting them fall, no one of them escaped death. Thus were exchanged the pleasure and the pain. For those on the outside now were those who mounted, who mourned in great sorrow for those who were so handled, and those who were within, who seeing their enemies advance on every side, had thought they were beaten, now took great comfort. So at this moment, and those on the ramparts stopped, panic struck, fearing that they should die as their comrades did. The Christians leaped forth from the vaults where they were hiding and quickly slew many of the Turks who were gathered on the walls, and compelled the rest to leap down, and then sprang back to their hiding places as they saw the griffins return. When Queen Califia saw this, she was very sad, and she said, "O ye idols, in whom I believe, in whom I worship, what is this which has happened as favorably to my enemies as to my friends? I believe that with your aid and with my strong forces and great munition, I should be able to destroy them. But it has not so proved. Again, apologies. A little tough to read. And she gave orders to her women as they should mount the ladders and struggle to gain the towers, and put to the sword all those who took refuge in them to be secure with the griffins. They obeyed their queen's command and dismounted at once, placing before their breasts such breastplates as no weapon could pierce, and, as I told you, with the armor of all gold which covered their legs and their arms. Quickly they crossed the plain and mounted the ladders lightly, and possessed themselves of the whole circuit of the walls, and began to fight fiercely with those who had taken refuge in the vaults of the towers. But they defended themselves bravely, being indeed in quarters well protected, with but narrow doors. And those of the city who were in the streets below shot at the women with arrows and darts, which pierced them through their sides, so that they received many wounds, because their golden armor was so weak. And the griffins returned flying above them, and would not leave them. When Queen Califia saw this, she carried to the sultans, "Make your troops mount, that they may defend mine against these fowls of mine, who have dared attack them." At once the sultans commanded their people to ascend the ladders and gain the circle and the towers in order that they by night the whole host might join them, and they might gain the city. The soldiers rushed from their camps, mounted on the walls where the women were fighting, but when the griffins saw them, at once they seized on them as ravenously as if all the day had not caught anybody. And when the women threatened them with their knives, they were only the more enraged, so that although they took shelter for themselves, the griffins dragged them out by main strength, lifted them up into the air, and let them fall, so that they all died. The fear and panic of the pagans were so great that much more quickly than they had mounted did they descend and take refuge in their camp. The queen, seeing this rout without remedy, sent at once to command those who held watch and guard on the griffins, that they should recall them and shut them up in the vessel. They then, hearing the queen's command, mounted on top of the mast and called them with loud voices in their language, and they, as if they had been human beings, all obeyed and obediently returned to their cages. The first day's attack of these flying monitors on the beleaguered city was not therefore a distinguished success. The author derives a lesson from it, which we do not translate, but recommend to the students of present history. It fills a whole chapter, of which the title is exhortation addressed by the author to the Christians, setting before their eyes the great obedience which these griffins, brute animals, rendered to those who had instructed them. The sultans may have well doubted whether their new ally was quite what she had claimed to be. She felt this herself and said to them, "Since my coming has caused you so much injury, I wish that it may cause you equal pleasure. Command your people that they shall sally out, and we will go to the city against those knights who dare to appear before us, and we will let them press on the most severe combat that they can. And I, with my people, will take the front of the battle." The sultans gave command at once to all of their soldiers who had armor, that they should rush forth immediately and should join in mounting upon the rampart. Now that these birds were encaged again, and they with the horsemen followed close upon Queen Califia, and immediately the army rushed forth and pressed upon the wall, but not so prosperously as they had expected, because the people of the town were already in their harnesses, and as the pagans mounted upon their ladders, the Christians threw them back, whence very many of them were killed and wounded. Others pressed forward with their iron picks and others tools and dug fiercely in the circuit of the wall. These were very much distressed and put in danger by the oil and other things which were thrown upon them, but not so much but that they succeeded in making many breaches and openings. But when this came to the ears of the emperor, who always kept command of 10,000 horsemen, he commanded all of them to defend these places as well as they could, so that to the grief of the pagans, the people repaired the breaches with many timbers and stones and piles of earth. When the queen saw this repulse, she rushed with her own attendants with great speed to the gate Aquilia, which was guarded by Norandel. She herself went in advance of the others, wholly covered with one of those shields, which we have told you they wore, and with her lance held strongly in her hand. Norandel, when he saw her coming, went forth to meet her, and they met so vehemently that their lances were broken into pieces, and yet neither of them fell. Norandel at once put hand upon his sword, and the queen upon her great knife, of which the blade was more than a palm bored, and they gave each other great blows. At once they all joined in a melee, one against another, all so confused and with such terrible blows that it was a great marvel to see it. And if some of the women fell upon the ground, so did some of the cavalries. And if this history does not tell an extent which of them fell, and by what blow of each, showing the great force and courage of the combatants, it is because their numbers were so great, and they fell so thick one upon another, that the great master, Helzabat, who saw and described the scene, could not determine what in particular passed in these exploits, except in a few very rare affairs, like this of the queen and Norandel, who both joined fight, as you have heard. And again, welcome. Thanks for sticking with me. Long-winded one here. We'll give a little taste of the next article that we'll talk about in episode 2 of this. I don't really want to say episode 2. The next part. And then we'll make some correlations and go through some cool Amazon articles, and that'll kind of be it. What do we have coming for the channel? Again, I explained to some of you, I don't want to make any promises or give out dates on episodes, because I'm just a constant failure when it comes to actually sticking to those things. As I've said before, I got 2 other jobs, and I'm a father, and we're getting into spring and summer, and sports have all started back up, and finding time to even sit down to do this is very difficult. So I'm going to do the best I can to get material out, but I'm not going to set dates or make promises, because I just end up letting everybody down, and my schedule doesn't really allow for that type of scheduling, unfortunately. So yeah, Anomalous America, Nebraska's done. It's been done for several weeks, but as I've stated before, I haven't had the time to sit down and actually get everything put together in a format to do an episode. So that's ready to go. I'd like to have it out in the next week, but again, no promises. I have the wrap up episode for the radium material done as well. Again, that's just finding the time to do it. And I've really been trying to get some interviews lined up because I really enjoy and I miss doing interviews with authors I like and friends and other content creators. I've had two people scheduled, at least hanging in the wind, but again, due to my own personal scheduling conflicts, it's been difficult. So, yeah, little update, but back to the article. It is to great Master Helzabot that a grateful posterity owes all these narratives and the uncounted host of romances which grew from them. For in the first place, he was the skillful leech who cured all the wounds of all the parties of his distinction who were not intended to die. And in the second place, his notes furnished the memoirs pour servir, of which all the writers say they availed themselves. The originals, alas, are lost. The tumult was so great that at once the battle between these two ended, those on each side coming to their aid of their chief. Then I tell you that the things that this queen did in arms, like slaying knights or throwing them wounded from their horses as she passed audaciously forward among her enemies, were such that it cannot be told nor believed that any woman has ever shown such prowess. And as she dealt with so many noble knights, and no one of them left her without giving her many and heavy blows, yet she received them all upon her very strong and hard shield. When Talenque, and Manelli saw what this woman was doing, and the great loss which those of their own party were receiving from her, they rushed out upon her and struck her with such blows as if they considered her possessed. And her sister, who was named Leola, who saw this, rushed in like a mad lioness to her succor and pressed the knights so mortally that the loss of their honor, she drew Califia from their power and placed her among her own troops again. And at this time, you would have said that the people of the fleets had the advantage, so that if it had not been for the mercy of God and the great force of the Count Brandalo and his companions, the city would have been wholly lost. Many fell dead on both sides, but many more of the pagans, because they had the weaker armor. Thus continues the romance, as you have heard, went on this attack and cruel battle till nearly night. At this time there was no one of the gates open, excepting that which Norandal guarded. As to others, the knights, having been withdrawn from them, ought of course to have bolted them. Yet it was very different, as I will tell you, for as the two sultans greatly desired to see these women fight, they had bidden their own people not to enter into the lists. But when they saw how the day was going, they pressed upon the Christians so fiercely that gradually they might all enter into the city. And as it was, more than 100 men and women did enter, and God, who guided the emperor, having directed him to keep the other gates shut, knowing in what way the battle feared, he pressed them so heartily with his knights that, killing some, he drove the others out. Then the pagans lost many of their people, and they slew them from the towers, more than 200 of the women being slain. And those within also were not without great losses, since 10 of the cruzados were killed, which gave great grief to their companions. These were the Led Adirian, the Fajariq, Tryon, and Emozel, the Borgona, and the two sons of Isenjo. All the people of the city having returned, as I tell you, the pagans also retired to their camps, and the Queen Califia to her fleet, since she had not yet taken quarters on the shore. And the other people entered into their ships, so that there was no more fighting that day. I have translated this passage at length because it gives the reader an idea of the romantic literature of that day. Literally, its only literature excepting books of theology or of devotion. Over acres of such reading served. We're almost through this, guys. Long one, sorry. Out in large folios, the yellow-covered novels of their time. Did the Pizarros and the Balbosas and the Cortezes and other young blades while away the weary hours of their camp life. Glad enough was Cortez out of such a tale to get the noble name of his great discovery. The romance now proceeds to bring the different princes of chivalry from the west, as it had brought Califia from the east. As soon as Amadeus arrives at Constantinople, he sends for his son Esplandia, who was already in alliance with the emperor of Greece. The pagan sultan of Lycia and the queen of Califia, hearing of their arrival, send them to the following challenge. Rodario, sultan of Lycia, shield and rampart of the pagan law, destroyer of the Christians, cruel enemy of the enemies of God, and the very mighty Queen Califia, lady of the great island of California, famous for its great abundance of gold and precious stones, we have to announce to you, Amadis of Gaul, king of Great Britain, and young his son, knight and of the great serpent, that we are come into these parts with the intention of destroying this city of Constantinople, on account of the injury and loss which the much honored king Amato of Persia, our cousin and friend, has received from the bad emperor, giving him favor and aid, because a part of his territory has been taken away from him by fraud. And as our desire in this thing is also to gain glory and fame in it, so also has fortune treated us favorably in that regard. For we know the great news which has gone through all the world of your great chivalry. We have agreed, therefore, if it is agreeable to you, or if you might, it is sufficient for it, to attempt a battle of our persons against yours in the presence of this great company of the nations, the conquered to submit to the will of the conquerors, or to go to any place where they may order. And if you refuse this, we shall be able, with much cause, to rejoin all your past glories to your own, counting them as being gained by us. Whence it will be clearly seen in the future how the victory will be on our side. This challenge was taken to the Christian camp by a black and beautiful damsel, richly attired, and was discussed there in council. Amadeus put an end to the discussion by saying, we'll finish the rest of that story and we'll kind of wrap up Amadis of Gaul and do a slight overview, as it's a much longer story. We'll bring it back to the island of California, go over some old maps, show some literature from California in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, where it wasn't a mystery or myth, it was considered completely factual. Get into some stories of Amazons from South America, Mexico, and the Americas. Talk a little bit more about this idea of underground civilizations, which again, we've covered so much of that in the past episodes, but from the viewpoint of California specifically and the Amazons. But yeah, so this will be a continuation, this page, to where we were just at. But, an hour long excerpt that is written in a way that makes it very difficult to follow along, let alone read. So, reading through these articles earlier today, I struggled to even want to go through this one, but just due to the fact that its date and it being the first article describing this storyline, I just thought it was a good place to start. But yeah, so let's go back and just kind of look at some comments here. Ask questions. Type in any questions you guys have or anything you'd like me to discuss further. Anything you want to add to this story. We'll talk a little bit more about the Mogul Tartar connection. But yeah, anything at all, throw it in there now. Please. Also, what originally brought this subject matter back to the kind of forefront of me wanting to do a video on it, or reminding me to go back to the material, was I was sent a video, like I was mentioning earlier, by a subscriber discussing the esoteric and hidden correlations between the Wizard of Oz and the story of Queen Califia. And it was just really remarkable. Having read this Califia story several times, I had never made the correlation. But I just thought this was interesting, so I just wanted to throw this out there. Basically, my subscriber was talking about how the Theosophist and the writer of The Wizard of Oz is really putting the story out there as a story about Queen Califia, and that the whole Wizard of Oz story was a journey through that mythos, and that the Wicked Witch of the West is really Queen Califia, and her flying monkeys are the griffins, and her kind of redemption story as being the enemy coming full circle to kind of be the hero of the story. Yeah, really interesting. Just wanted to throw that out there for those of you that maybe want to dive a little bit deeper into this idea. And as we read a little bit more material, maybe you'll see some of the symbology. Makes me want to watch The Wizard of Oz again with this kind of historical explanation. But he told me that there was an interview. I tried to find a clip of it so I could play it for you guys. But told me of a really interesting podcast interview where a writer was describing this same storyline that I've explained to you. But it was in a podcast, but I haven't had any luck finding it. So if any of you can find it, be sure to share it with me. The community post page where I shared this video link, or you can email it to me or DM me on Instagram or Twitter, and we can share it in the next episode. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, making this one semi-short. I know that was a long article. I've got about 7 or 8 little excerpts for the next episode, talking about California as an island, exploring worldwide stories of the Amazons and the kind of Greek mythos related to those same stories, and how we can kind of relate those back here to the terrestrial paradise and kind of tie that all up in a little bow. So yeah, we'll go through this article here, which is just kind of a continuation of where I left on that previous article. And then we'll get into some more historical references of Queen Califia and how I could make jumps between her being possible overlays with the Queen of Sheba. And yeah. So I'm just going to kind of read through some comments and wrap it up there. Micmac, thanks for being here. Sherry, good to see you. I'm gonna try and do the next episode in the next 2 days. I've just got an opening in my schedule, and that makes the most sense for me. Preferably Wednesday, maybe tomorrow, depending on what's going on here at home. So maybe that will happen. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'll just record it in my free time and post it as a video. And yeah, cut down on the long-winded articles. As much as they're so beneficial and there's so many good ones, it's just, I don't know, be a little hard for me sometimes. But yeah, the movie Zardoz from 1974 is great too. The Wizard of Oz, Zardoz. Interesting. The Griffins are quite like the flying monkeys of Oz. Yeah, I mean, again, this idea of Queen Califia, it may be completely new material. So it's telling people to go watch The Wizard of Oz without any real background on the story may be silly, but really interesting stuff. Indigenous Americans were a vexing problem for early American interpreters of Revelation who believed them to be ancient Canaanites, the lost tribes of Israel and minions. Okay, interesting. Yeah, there were definitely some uh, Canaanite overlays with Indigenous Americans. Absolutely. I wouldn't go as far as to say that they were all minions of the Antichrist. I quite clearly showed that many of the Dakota tribes had some of the most ancient manuscripts of the Bible and Bible verses of any people in the world at the time, um, and how stories of Noah and the flood and many things exist throughout much of the tribes. But yeah, interesting. Thanks for the comment. Such an intricate story of people that seem to just disappear after the Spanish came. Yeah, so Windhammer, that's a great comment, and that's kind of why I was touching on the idea of overlaid timelines and false historical narratives, and yeah, maybe one day we'll do a deeper dive into flamenco and talk about his chronology and show through his research how we can eliminate false timelines, and how this kind of Bronze Age, Iron Age was a bunch of nonsense, and that as we go farther back in historical records, we keep finding that actually our way of breaking these timelines down is literally just about inverted. The ideas of Atlantis, again, I've done so many videos on that. Lemuria. I have some interesting material on California being a remnant of Lemuria. But yeah, anyways, I'm rambling. So yeah, the Spanish and all of that, I think, is a bunch of nonsense. Just like when you really look into Columbus, you realize that this wasn't some willy-nilly hop on a boat and we'll see what we find in 40 days of sailing. It was completely planned out and well orchestrated and well funded, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. And they knew what they not only did they know exactly what they were looking for, they knew what languages that were going to be spoken and what kind of translators they needed to have available. And yeah, preparing for resets, things like that. And why, again, for anyone that's kind of new-ish in here, why the 1800s is such a sweet spot for this material, because we're dealing with such a large question mark in history, pre-1840s, that you really can't believe anything we're told about America. I mean, obviously, even now, that's still the case, right? The people that we're told have our best interests at heart certainly don't. And there just seems to be a little more honesty as to the approach and discovery of things in America in this time frame. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Not trying to convince anybody of anything. This is kind of just entertainment and interesting stories, and sparking um, a flame in those of you out there listening to maybe go and research things on your own. And but yeah, that's a bit of a rant there. But again, apologies for the delay and the time away, but it was important for me and my family, most importantly. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there. 88, great number. And again, since I see the 88, reminding you guys that there is at least one more episode of radio material in the works. And I have a pretty cool interview with a friend, hopefully, that I can get on the channel here in the next few weeks. It'll tie nicely into the radio material. But yeah, so before I do anything else, I'm going to wrap up the Queen Califia stuff. I don't even want to say wrap it up, but just finish what I have as far as material in that regard. And yeah, stay tuned. Let's keep it simple. I'm not going to give any dates or times, but the next few days I'll do a part 2 to this, and that'll kind of be it. I've got 4 chapters of Queen Mu archive dive series done. Just kind of spacing those out. So there'll be an hour long 2-chapter video coming out here before Friday of Queen Mu. So that's on the way. And also, I want to know in the comments for the next video, do you guys want me to do the entire book in just one long audiobook read through? Maybe for those of you who are interested enough to listening to an audiobook and not break it up into chapter segments. So yeah, keep that in mind. Let me know what you think next episode, if I should just do full read throughs. It'd probably be more efficient and I could get through more books that way. But last time I kind of threw that out there, you guys seemed like you wanted a little bit slower pace with more correlations to other material. So yeah, keep that in mind. Let me know what you think. Appreciate you for joining me, and stay tuned for more. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys in the next few days. Have a great night. Bye.